Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Texans for Lawsuit Reform, the maybe largest PAC in the state of Texas, is launching an attack on Speaker Burrows, Mark LaHood, Mitch Little, and a number of other conservative and moderate Republicans. They're just attacking everybody right now. Also, the emergency episode I released talking about Senate Bill 12, I'm going to give you an update on just how strong that bill was when it came out of the conference committee. And one of our biggest champions decided to retire, and we'll talk briefly about that. Let's get to the show. I am pushing back my session wrap-up 1 week. My plan was today to do a session overview, the good, next week, the bad, and the following week, the ugly. The only reason it's in that order, you can blame Clint Eastwood, I guess, if you want to, because he didn't say the ugly, the bad, and the good. So we're going to start with the good, then the bad, then the ugly. My plan was to start that this week, and the session ended, sine die. I came home, my little almost 2-year-old daughter, Vesper, was sick and vomiting, and I just decided I had not been home a lot. So I sat home with her all day, and she just cuddled up with somebody. She just needed to be cuddling with somebody at all times during the day. And so I spent all day with her and did not have time to really put together something to sufficiently give you a holistic view of the good of the session. Now, again, we're going to do the good, the bad, and the ugly. And for some of you who are grassroots activists, you might not like the good episode as much. I've seen a lot of people make statements like, what good did this session do? Or did we get anything out of this session? And the truth is, we got a substantial amount of conservative policy out of the session. And I will overview that with you, whether it's medical freedom or guns or social issues, transparency. There's a various amounts, some election integrity policy, some grid policy. We are going to go through that. There were a number of bills. I talked to you about the Senate making sure they passed, which was Shelley Luther's, Mark DeRazio's, Mitch Little's bill. So we're going to overview all of that in the good next week. I will very quickly, though, talk to you about Senate Bill 12. I personally think Senate Bill 12 is the most consequential bill that passed this session. Again, a lot of these bills could have passed in more watered down forms, which would have made them less consequential. It wouldn't have meant that they didn't do a lot of good, but it would have made them less consequential. Senate Bill 12 was that. 2 episodes ago, I came to you in a midweek emergency episode to tell you just how bad the House version was coming out. When I say how bad it was, it wouldn't do bad things to the current state of the public education system, but it was intentionally leaving a bunch of doors open for DEI, sexual orientation, and gender identity to seep into the public school system. Right now, the system is flooded with that. This was going to clog up a lot of it, but intentionally leave holes that it could still seep into. And what came out of conference committee was a fantastic piece of legislation, and the most credit goes to Senator Brandon Creighton, who both authored this legislation last session and this session and fought hard for it to be as strong as possible. Now, I overviewed the Leach Amendment with y'all, the vast majority of the Leach Amendment, and I would say the most dangerous parts of the Leach Amendment were taken out of that bill, and the conference committee fully supported that being taken out. So that would have been the House side, and the Senate side said, hey, let's remove some of this. And I told you that a lot of House members said, we didn't even realize the implications of this. We need to get rid of it. So most of that was taken out. But the most important thing, though, was that language was put back in that Alan Schoolcraft had fought to put back in on the floor of the Texas House. And that would have been to restore the ban on sexual orientation and gender clubs. And we now know, I won't go into a lot of details, but we now know that these clubs were even more impactful and a larger part of grooming children than we knew before. Because when this paragraph got put back in the conference committee and it came back to the floor, the Democrats spent 3 hours bemoaning one paragraph of an over 40-page bill. And that one paragraph is the paragraph that Alan Schoolcraft fought to add on the floor, went down on a technicality, but it came back in conference. And that paragraph said you can't have these gender and sexuality clubs on campus. And I will tell you, what the Democrats then proceeded to say in their speeches and questions was basically laying out to people just how involved these clubs were in the early formation of many of the LGBT members' lives. And so these members got up and shared how these clubs were used in their life to shape them into the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender activists that they are today. The advocates they are for these radical gender theories started for some of them in the clubs that groomed them. So I'm so grateful that that happened. In fact, here is a clip of what Mary Gonzalez said about Senate Bill 12, and I think this is really important. I know some of this will be in the good for next week, but it's really important to understand exactly what happened in conference committee to Senate Bill 12. So let's go to this clip.
Members, as SB 12 left here, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But in the form that it is in now, it is dangerous. It is forever changing the role of teachers, counselors, students.
Listen to what Mary Gonzalez said. She is the pansexual member from El Paso. That is her. That's the way she identifies. She identifies as a pansexual individual. And she said, when Senate Bill 12 left here, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And that is often when we get to the good. One of the things you'll hear me say next week is I'm going to detail in some of these cases how a bill that would show up to the House floor wasn't necessarily a great bill, but conservatives forcing it to become better or stronger made it a better bill. And those are half of the battles that the grassroots fight, are often just shoring up something that's going to happen and making sure it's done to the extent to which it needs to be done to accomplish the policy that we've actually set forth to accomplish. And Mary Gonzalez basically admits what Democrats thought they had done. They thought they had taken enough of the teeth out of Senate Bill 12. And in her quote, in her words, she said it is not as bad as it could have been. Meaning there was still some sexual orientation, gender identity, and diversity, equity, inclusion that we felt like we could get into the public school system even with this ban. And she goes, but now it's dangerous, meaning now it actually seems to have the effect that it was designed to have. And now we're really upset. And for 3 hours, they debated against it. So again, I know I'm kind of starting in on the good of the session, but I wanted to give you all a little bit of a taste of some of that. You should know that so many of y'all, when Senate Bill 12 was watered down in the House, came out and were very loud and strong and forceful in your messaging, and that had an impact, and Senate Bill 12 got fully restored, and I'm super grateful that it did. The people of Texas will be better served, and our children in our public school system will be more protected from these radical Marxist ideas. So that's an early preview of the good of the session. Now, I will also talk about the bad of the session and the ugly. Now, I am sure that if you are an elected official who's a Republican who wants to go home and say this was the best, awesome, greatest session in the history of the universe, then you're going to like the episode The Good, because it will be focusing on good things that happened. And if you just take that in a silo, you could go, aha! This gives me ammunition I need. But you will also have to deal with the bad and the ugly of the session, because our goal is to focus both on what was accomplished in a positive way and on the obvious layups that were missed, obvious wins that were missed. And we need to focus on those so that we understand, one, the consequences of Democrat influence when they're given that influence and power. So the question ultimately comes down to, when you give Democrats this influence and power, what does that result in? And we will show you what we believe are the carcasses that resulted from that partnership, and the obvious wins that we should have gotten, that a Republican majority would have voted on if those bills had gotten to the floor. So we will have the good next week, the bad the week after, the ugly the week after. Okay, Senate Bill 12. That is good news. Interestingly enough, I'm planning the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I know different groups that have gone out there and said, this is what we accomplished and this is what failed. But nobody yet has really gone super aggressive against any particular individual. And usually during the summer, people evaluate, they let the dust settle, and then they come out and say, here's some analysis. But I will tell you who did not wait around to go on the attack against both the speaker conservative Republican members, even some moderate members. That's Texans for Lawsuit Reform. They put out this session overview, and I'll just quote from it here real quick. It says, first, this is Lee Parsley. First, we will provide a summary of the good session in which we accomplished significant gains with our business allies in the regulatory reform, enhance the Texas Business Court, and improve the Texas Commercial Codes. Second, we'll summarize the quote unquote bad session, in which committee assignments by Speaker Dustin Burrows in the House doomed critically important tort reforms which were supported by hundreds of Texas organizations and businesses. Governor Greg Abbott. So they're basically saying, we had all these people on board with our stuff, and we're mad that some of our tort reform failed. Now, as a reminder, if you have not seen Hubris, the documentary that Texas Scorecard did on Texans for Lawsuit Reform, you need to go watch it, and you should share it with your Republican friends. This is an organization that has probably been declaring more war on the conservative movement in Texas over the last 2 years than any other entity that I know of. And so TLR has come in aggressively and tried to stop the conservative move of the Texas House. The House has moved to the right, and Texans for Lawsuit Reform worked overtime to try to stop that from happening. They picked a ton of fights. They went all in. They lost a ton of races. And then they came to the legislature the next session, 9 months, having not really repaired many of these relationships, or even, I would say, made a significant effort to repair these relationships, and said, hey, give us everything we want. Which just seems like, there's a word I'm looking for. Oh, hubris. That's the word I was looking for. It seems like hubris. So if you want to know, well, why does Texans for Lawsuit Reform have hubris? You should watch the documentary and you will understand. And it would take the amount of hubris that they seem to still be possessing to the day after the session, while everybody's kind of letting the dust settle, resting, to just go, we're launching an all-out attack. Here's what they said further. The House JCJ committee was composed of 11 lawyers appointed by Speaker Burrows, 5 Democrats we knew from the outset probably would oppose these bills, 5 Republicans who are philosophically aligned with the business community, and a 6th Republican named Mark LaHood. And then they go on to attack Mark LaHood. They attack Mitch Little at one point in this deal. They attack Speaker Burrows. They attack Republicans that voted against an amendment that they opposed. Interestingly enough, they don't acknowledge that a lot of Republicans voted for a lot of their bills and then disagreed with them on one amendment to one of their bills. They're acting like they're at war with everybody. It is a very interesting and unique position that TLR has put themselves in. I found this so ironic, and I actually tweeted this yesterday. So a week or two ago, Lee Parsley was being interviewed for a story, and they were asking about these bills and if they're moving and what the fate would be. It said, Parsley said there's still more work to be done, and he thinks lawmakers agree with him. And then here was his quote. We never make enemies. We only make friends. That's really our job around here. That's Lee Parsley. Now, I just want to make this observation. Texans for Lawsuit Reform has said things like this in the past. We never make enemies. We only make friends. That's really our job around here. But that just hasn't been true in the last couple years. When I got into Texas politics early on, I would reach out to Texans for Lawsuit Reform when I was working on a project which would overlap with their values. And in general, they would want to work with you, even if they disagreed with you 3 months before on a different issue. And this is my encouragement to grassroots Republicans all the time. Just because you disagree with somebody in January doesn't mean you won't agree with them in February on a different policy issue. But the last several years, Texans for Lawsuit Reform took a very different approach. They said, all of you who are on the conservative side are our enemies, and we don't want the party to go this way. They said, this attorney general who is rightfully elected shouldn't belong there. We're mad that he's suing businesses. We're mad that he's not listening to us. We're mad that he's using his authority to actually hold accountable corporations. Because if you notice, all their whole statement is the business community, the business community. And they don't represent the average Texan. They represent a conglomerate of people that associate as the business community. And so when Ken Paxton sues Google or Meta and wins billions of dollars because they're bad actors, you won't see Texans for Lawsuit Reform applauding his action. In fact, they are quietly and in some cases loudly directly opposing the attorney general suing these woke corporations. Why? Because they're part of the quote unquote business community. And then they went and attacked almost every single conservative that ran in the last election cycle. But then they have this quote saying, we never make enemies, we only make friends. And then their big plan didn't quite succeed. And then immediately they're like, actually, we like making enemies. That's what it sounds like. When you listen to them, that's what it sounds like. So there is a bit of an identity crisis going on at Texans for Lawsuit Reform. This doesn't surprise anybody. And for those of you who are just a normal Republican voter, you're going, I don't know how this affects me. Well, that's because you haven't watched Hubris. And so if you watched the documentary, which, my wife watched it and said that was really well done. And she's not a huge Texas Politico person, so you can at least know that you will be semi-entertained, even if it's not something that you, are always engaged in all around. But then you would know why this is so important, that this organization and PAC has decided to take such an antagonistic view of a broad coalition of Republicans that are not on board with whatever they want. They are used to coming in and saying, this is what we want, and everybody's saying, we will give it to you, and not asking questions. And Texans for Lawsuit Reform's own actions have created problems for them. And they don't seem to want to change. If anything, what they seem to be indicating is that they're going to go on the attack. Even if somebody agrees with them 95% of the time and disagrees with them 5%, they're going to attack that person. They want everybody in that legislature to agree with them 100% of the time. I don't think that's a super good idea, but Texans for Lawsuit Reform has the right to behave how they want to behave. Though it doesn't seem like, in Lee Parsley's words, they never make enemies and only make friends. But that will be up to them to decide. Let's take a quick break.
Texans for Lawsuit Reform was widely successful in fighting the political establishment. Now, they are the establishment. TLR was started to fight injustice, and now they allow injustice. Once a grassroots organization, TLR now works in opposition to the conservative grassroots majority in Texas. It's unclear why they exist anymore, except for the accumulation of power. I would have liked to have asked them about that.
In closing, I want to say just a handful of words about Tony Tinderholt, who announced his retirement on the very last day of session. He announced that he would not be coming back to the Texas House of Representatives. And it was a bittersweet time. I can tell you, Tony is somebody who I've known since several weeks after he started running for the legislature, maybe a couple months after. I got a call from somebody in Arlington back when I was running campaigns, and they said, hey, this guy who's a combat veteran was at a Republican club meeting, and we started talking about Diane Patrick, who was a liberal Republican who served as the vice chair of the Higher Education Committee. And they said, well, Diane Patrick is a liberal Republican. And Tony said, well, somebody needs to run against her if she's a liberal Republican. And they said, well, you should. And he said, I will. And he literally Googled how to file your treasurer's report and filed a treasurer's report and printed off some push cards and started knocking every single door in the neighborhoods around his house. And when I say every single door, he was just going door to door to door to door, which if you know how campaigns work, that's not how you effectively communicate, because 30-40% of the doors aren't even registered to vote. So what are you doing knocking on those doors? And of the ones that are registered to vote, 80% of them will never vote in your primary. So what are you doing knocking on those doors? Some of them are hardcore Democrats, but he didn't know. He was passionate, and he's one of the hardest working people you'll ever meet. And so he just went to talk to every single person. And I ended up running his campaign, talking to him, saying, here's some things that you could do better, and I'd be willing to help you with this. I think I charged him like $8,000 or $10,000 for the whole campaign. He won by almost 10 points, maybe more, maybe a little less. I don't remember the exact margin, but he clobbered Diane Patrick, who freaked out at the very end. I think she spent $300,000 to $400,000, and Tony Tinderholt spent like 100,000 total, including like third-party efforts and him and everything. He was outspent 4, 5, 6 to 1, if I remember the margins correctly, and he won. And he has been a stalwart, consistent fighter since then. And he's been somebody who also, for me, has been a very good friend and still will be a very good friend, even though he is not going to serve in the legislature. It was a really special moment. He got up on the House floor and just wanted to let his colleagues know that he was not coming back. He had about a 5-minute speech. And then that was preceded that was followed by 15 minutes of Republicans and Democrats alike getting up and sharing stories of Tony and commending him for his servant's heart. More Democrats spoke than Republicans about the heart that Tony had for both that legislative body and how he conducted himself as a man of character. And so if you want to hear the full ceremony, you can go to my YouTube channel. I've posted the entire thing there, or you can go to Tony's Twitter. He posted the video as well. So Tony Tinderholt, I would encourage you to watch it or listen to it. We are going to close today's show out with just his talk, because I think it really does have an impact. And so that'll be 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes of our show. But I will just say in closing that I'm incredibly grateful for the leadership that Tony exhibited. He's done this time and time again. There have been sessions where he was fighting alone, and there have been sessions like today where he was fighting with dozens of Republicans who were with him any given day to advance conservative policy. And you should be grateful for that, by the way. Again, there will be a good and bad and ugly wrap-up of the session. And when I have the ugly episode, I'm sure many of you will say, my gosh, I'm really frustrated with the things that aren't passing. But at that moment, what you should also remember is that we have more conservative representation than we've ever had and a more conservative legislature. And therefore, we have delivered more results. That is how it works. When all of you are engaged and when organizations are super active and when the party is advocating and when individual legislators are fighting and people spread throughout different committees are pushing, we can get more results. That is the way you build a coalition, and that is the way you deliver results that the people of Texas need. And Tony Tinderholt has been an integral part of that, and I'm really grateful. So I wanted to close today's episode with just the speech part of his closing. Like I said, if you want to go watch or listen to the full 20 minutes, you can go to his Twitter or my YouTube channel. Guys, I really appreciate everything that y'all did this session. I hope you recognize that the work that you did had an impact, that I believe Texans' lives will be better off as a result of the positive things accomplished. And I do think that light was shown on the negative things that happened as well. And we will handle both of those with truth as we process how this session turned out. May God bless you, and may God bless Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The 89th legislative session marks my 6th session in this chamber representing House District 94. There have been ups, there's been downs, amendments, points of order, disagreements, and achievements. It's been one of the highlights of my life. Oftentimes, people forget the sacrifice of serving in the legislature. It's been a job that has to be done by somebody, and I'm honored to have done it. I've dedicated 32 years of my life to public service. 11 in the Air Force, taking part in counter-drug missions throughout South and Central America, and then after 9/11, I served for 10 years in the Army as a platoon leader, executive officer, detachment commander, recruiting commander, and then I kept volunteering to deploy to combat zones. Arguably, my 12 years here has been one of the more difficult combat zones I've had the pleasure of serving in. 2 years ago, I decided I'd run again for a 6th term, hoping I was going to be coming back with friends. I'm proud to say my hopes came true, and I was joined by the most conservative group of freshman legislators this body's ever seen. I returned to this chamber with one goal: accomplishing as much conservative policy as possible while humbly evaluating if it was time to go home and let others continue this vital fight for the conservative movement. We've accomplished a lot in 6 sessions, but there's still more work to be done. While more Texas GOP priorities passed this session than previously had, there were still missed opportunities and so much left to do, just like both sides have said every session. To my Democrat colleagues, I hope you know that I've always tried to treat you with respect that you deserve as members of this body who are chosen by your districts to fight for the values you hold. To the Republican colleagues I say sometimes, oftentimes disagreed with, please know that my absence next session will not remove in any way the pressure to deliver real conservative results for the people of Texas. And though we've disagreed at times, I've been truly honored to serve alongside each of you. To the conservative freshmen that worked so hard to be here, you're equipped, eager, and dedicated to ensuring the passage of the Texas GOP legislative priorities for the future sessions to come. Texas is in good hands with each of you, and it's time for me to step aside. This is the hard part. To my wonderful wife, Bethany, and my children, Tyler and Brennan, I'm coming home. I get to be a dad. I don't have to miss practices and dances. I'm going to be able to do prayer at dinner time with you instead of on Facebook or FaceTime. Bedtime books. And so this was the hardest paragraph for me because this is why I'm leaving. And I have one more paragraph, but I would tell my peers, I want to come here and be the tough guy, but we're all human. And we all have family. And I encourage you guys to think about the sacrifices that you make here because God wants me to be a husband and a dad right now. And I'm going to miss this place so much. But it makes it easier knowing that I'm going to do the things that I think God wants me to do and that my wife needs me to do and my children need. So while I'm sad to go and I'm very emotional about it, I want to share with my peers that if you're ever thinking about this and you're having a hard time with it, I would tell you, pick family first because someone else is going to come do this and they're going to do it well. Members, as my role in this chamber is coming to an end, I do intend to finish this entire term, so I have another 19 months. So if we have a special session, we'll be here again. I hope you recognize that each of the decisions you make will affect me and my family when I'm gone. My prayer is that this chamber recognizes all that Texas needs from you and that you never take for granted the immense honor and responsibility that comes with serving in the Texas House. Thank you to my family and thank the members and thank you to the speaker.
Be sure to subscribe to Texas Scorecard on YouTube and click that bell to ensure you're a real Texan. If you liked this video and want to see more citizen-driven journalism, be sure to click like and go to texasscorecard.com to read about all things Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.